Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second Let's Talk Cattle webinar of 2021. Tonight, the topic is going to be focusing more on grassland management and getting cattle out to grass early. As we all know, we're trying to keep our costs down as much as possible on these dry stock farms across the country, and working on getting cattle out to grass early is probably the best weapon we have to try and reduce our costs. Tonight, joining me is going to be John Douglas from the Teagasc Grass10 team. John has been working with a number of farmers across the country for a few years now to try and encourage better practices in terms of getting out to grass early and managing grass swards. And overall, I suppose, trying to include more grazed grass in the diet of cattle throughout the year to reduce our cost base. Over the course of the webinar, you'll be able to put in questions as you want. So there's a Q&A box down the bottom of the screen, and if any of you want to ask us questions, you can type them in, and at the end of a presentation, we'll address all those questions, myself and John. So John, you're very welcome here on the webinar this evening, and I believe you have a good presentation for us to see.
Thanks very much, Alan, for letting me join tonight, and I have a good information here for farmers tonight on how to get out to grazing early this year and make the most of it, and going through the economic benefits of it, getting fertilizer out, and the practicalities of actually getting out to farm. And I have a presentation here now, which I might share with you. Yeah, so the topic for my discussion tonight, I suppose, with you, Alan, is spring grazing management on beef farms. And I work with Grass10. Grass10 is a program developed to help farmers to increase the amount of grass grown on their farms and increase the amount of grass utilised on their farms. And every extra ton of dry matter per hectare utilised on beef and sheep farms is worth €105. So grass utilised has a big impact on profitability on farms. We're going to start with a quote from Mark Twain, and he said, "The secret to getting ahead is getting started." And he's the author of the Huckleberry Finn books in America, one of America's famous authors. And I suppose, again, tonight, it's all about getting a head start and getting out early and making the most of it. And we'll see that from a case study here, video that I have in the presentation, one farmer that's making the most of that. So there's a lot of opportunities and challenges on beef farms at the minute. Obviously, profitability is an ongoing issue. There's workload with part-time farmers and shorter day length this time of year, and try to balance farming work and maybe cows calving. And then there's, I suppose, the spring grazing mindset, which is what I sort of see on farms with dry stock farmers, is that, you know, there's a change of mindset required to get cattle out earlier and grazing a bit longer in the autumn time as well, to increase the days of grass. And it's a change of management, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's something we need to keep working on. And I suppose with the help of the farmers that I have in my grazing courses, I'm able to produce videos and showcase, I suppose, how farmers can achieve the benefits of spring grazing, and which are, you know, moving over to the right hand side are the opportunities. Very profitable live weight gain from grass, as you said, it's the cheapest feed source, Alan. It's the best value that we have, you know, compared to silage and meal. It's a lot cheaper. Animals are healthier outside. There is a good grass supply on farms at the minute, and I suppose the goal of spring grazing is trying to set up the farm to grow more grass and set up the farm to grow better quality grass.
Okay, John. So what are we seeing from pasture base at the minute in terms of what kind of covers are there on farm?
Yeah, there's a good level of grass on farm from the farmers that have measured. Now, there's probably 300 or 400 covers in at this stage for opening covers in the last couple of weeks on farms, and the farm covers were in the 800s. So, you know, that means that there's a good range of covers on farms, probably from around 1700 back down to 300 or 400 of kilos of dry matter per hectare of cover. So good grass supply on farms at the minute this spring.
And is that much ahead of last year or normal, or is it behind or compared to most years?
I think it's slightly ahead of last year, which probably means that there's more farmers clued into their autumn grazing management and closing up the farm a bit better. Like the growth rates over the winter time wouldn't have been much different. So it's more down to the management, and that's why I suppose when we come back to this grazing mindset, it's more the management that we're trying to get across than more than any other sort of change on farm.
Okay.
Okay. And I suppose not to forget that every day that we can keep a livestock unit at grass, it's worth €2 to the farmer. Okay, so each day at grass is worth €2 per livestock unit. So that's the, I suppose, the big underlying economic advantage of all these opportunities that we have, and overcoming the challenges is that every day that there's livestock unit out grazing, it's worth €2. So spring grazing then, I suppose it covers the period of we say early February till early April, and maybe up to mid-April on some heavier farms. But the goal of spring grazing is to get grass into the cattle each day and set up the farm for the summer. So we want to keep grass in the diet of the animals. It's better quality, it's cheaper, it's all those things. We want to get as many days of grass in the springtime. I want to set up the farm for the next rotation for the summertime, so that we have a wedge of grass coming on behind us with a range of covers, that everything isn't just coming back together, which is the downfall of some cattle getting out late and running around the farm very quickly, is that you don't have much grass for a while and everything comes together. So we don't want that. We want to set up a wedge of grass coming along with nice quality. And the goal then is to utilize 1 ton of dry matter per hectare.
Okay, John. In terms of, right, we often hear these things, 1 ton of dry matter or so many tons per hectare. What does that look like? Could you put that into layman terms?
Yeah, I suppose 1 ton of dry matter, it's about 5 bales of silage, right? So that, it's the equivalent of grass and about 5 bales of silage. So if you take it on a per acre basis, it's about two bales an acre. That's what it is. But we're trying to obviously get out and graze it. It's not coming from silage. It's a bale of grass, if you like. So it's 2 bales of grass per acre.
And if you're to put a value on that, then I suppose how much a bale are you saying? So if you to work it back.
Put a value on that. Well, spring grass is worth about 16 cents a kilo. So if there's 200 kilos of dry matter in it, that's about €32 a bale. So €60, €65 an acre.
Okay, substantial.
So yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a nice bit now. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we continue on. So is getting out to grass worth it? And that comes back to your question probably just there, Alan. So the average days of grass in the country is around 220 days, or about 7.5 months. So, and that's roughly taken from the 1st of November, we'd say, to the 15th of March. That would be sort of, the average winter length, we'd say. So if we're looking at even just a 60-acre block, which is not a substantial size farm, it's a modest size. So if we can turn out in early February, we're getting about an extra month's grazing in the springtime, or 30 days. There's enough grass there, we'd say, to feed about 30 yearlings. So based on the area that we'd have available for grazing and the level of grass on the farm, there's enough there for about 30 yearlings every day, which is about the same stock to eat about 1 bale a day, right? So if you think about the 30 yearlings in shed, eat about a bale a day. Well, there's enough, on 60 acres, there's enough area there to graze those 30 yearlings outside on grass. So 30 strong yearlings, we'd say that's 20 livestock units. They're not a full livestock unit. So we'll say there's 20 livestock units there at €2 a day, which is the figure that we have from Teagasc research on getting out to grass and how much it's worth to us. So 2 times 20 is €40 a day. And if we're out for 30 days earlier, that's €1,200. So getting out for that month earlier in the springtime on a 60-acre farm is worth €1,200. Which is, if you break it down, you want to look at it in different light. If you said €40 a day times 7 days, that's €280, which is about a ton of meal. So every week you're saving the cost of a ton of meal by having these stock out.
So if we turn to cattle, then we're saying €1,200.
Yeah, well, sure. In total, like you can see there, how many cattle would be needed to make 1,200 in profit, Alan? You'd be probably more familiar than I would with it. But
probably yes. I suppose if we take it, you're generally talking between 100 to €200 a head for short stay cattle. It's probably in the region of 6 to 10 cattle to make that kind of money. So and we're not supposed to suggesting either we keep less cattle. We're saying, right, it's an additional margin onto your existing stock.
Exactly, it's the equivalent of that profit being added on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So I think we have a video next, John. Do we?
We do, yeah.
So you might introduce this. This is Aiden McGuire. He's he's in the Teagasc Green Acres program, the dairy calf beef program. Actually, is in County Meath, and you've been doing a good bit of work with him too, John, along with the Green Acres program on managing early grass.
Yeah, Alan, I did a video there with Aiden McGuire lately. Aiden is in the Green Acres program, and he's also a member of the Grass10 course in Meath. And I suppose over the last couple of years, he's made a lot of progress on farms. And one of the areas, along with the rearing of the calves and efficiencies and finishing animals, is getting his grazing management right. And last year, Aiden had a very long grazing season, and that was, usually down to getting out early in the springtime. So we're going to watch a video now and to see how Aiden gets out early in the springtime.
Today I can get my 110 yearlings out to grass. I earn €110. Hi, my name is Aiden McGuire. I'm farming calf to beef here in Navan, County Meath. I finish approximately 100 cattle a year. In spring, every day I can get my 110 yearlings out to grass. I earn €110. This is because I can cut down on the winter feed costs and increase daily live weight gain. The earlier I get the cattle out, the sooner they start thriving. The more weight they put on at grass, the more money they leave. When the cattle are out grazing, they're feeding themselves and spreading their own slurry. If you asked me 2 or 3 years ago, I would have thought you were mad to have cattle out so early in the year. I would have been afraid of running out of grass for them, having no grass in April and also poaching the land. I also wouldn't have planned to have them out this early. The thing I did was close off paddocks in the autumn time. I had about 60% of the farm closed during October. This means I have grass to graze in the springtime. I have 3 times more grass than I normally had at this time of year. Most of this grass has grown during October. I also use the spring rotation planner, which allocates a certain area to graze each week, from the end of January to the 10th of April. This long rotation ensures enough recovery time on the early grazed paddocks, which means I can graze them again at the start of my second rotation. My target is to graze 30% of the farm by the 1st of March. The cattle are getting 50% of their diet from grass and about 50% from silage. I only feed half the normal amount of silage in the evening. It's gone by morning and the cattle have an appetite for grazing. Before letting the cattle out in the morning, I check ground conditions by walking out to the paddock. Once I'm happy conditions are okay, I will set up my strip wire, giving the cattle enough for 1 day's grazing only. They never have to graze the same area twice. It's easy for me to get cattle out in the early spring because I have a roadway from the shed directly to the paddocks. I put in a lot of paddocks, which gives me great flexibility when choosing where to let the cattle out. Each paddock has a couple of entrances, which helps avoid cattle using the same entrance twice and avoids poaching. I let out the lighter stock earlier because they have the best chance of cleaning out paddocks without doing any damage. I let them into covers of between 700 and 900 kgs dry matter per hectare. This helps them to get used to grazing again and helps me get through more area to hit my grazing targets and a better chance of good clean outs of paddocks. The cattle usually go out around 9 or 10 in the morning and stay out till 4 or 5 in the evening depending on the weather conditions, but I am flexible. Some days I let the ground dry a bit before I let them out at midday, and other days I bring them back in earlier. The main thing is I'm getting my target area grazed each week. Last spring I only missed 2 days grazing in the month of February due to wet weather. On days it's not possible to get out grazing, I just feed the cattle their full allocation of silage in the hope of getting them out again tomorrow. When cattle get used to going out, they start looking forward to it, and so do I. To make sure I have grass coming back in March and April, I hope to spread 23 units of protected urea per acre on 70% of the farm in the next 2 weeks. The other 30% that was grazed in February will be followed with 2,500 gallons of slurry per acre. I will top up with a second round of protected urea in mid-March, aiming to have a total of 60 units of nitrogen per acre out by early April. The difference between my farm now and a couple of years ago is I'm growing more grass and grazing more grass, which has greatly increased my beef output per hectare. The key to that is a long grazing season. Last year I had 297 days at grass.
suppose if we were to just summarize that video, could you talk to us about how Aiden McGuire has changed since he's enrolled with you in Grass10 and Green Acres? I mean, he seems to have had a big transformation in the way he's managing his farm. Is he seeing it in the bottom line, and is he seeing it in terms of his overall management? Is he happy with the way things are going?
Yeah, Aiden's very happy with the way things are going. You know, he'd be better off telling you himself, I suppose. You know, more the financial side of things, but I can see from the group he's making big progress in terms of number of paddocks he's been putting in, and even his planning and how he's planning on maybe changing things, maybe with a smaller roadway here and there in the future time, just to allow him to get more access out to more paddocks that he can graze them easier, and you know, just I suppose reducing the risk of not being able to get out, because he sees it's such a benefit in the springtime. And it really, I suppose he did an article in today's farm as well in the back end of last year, or I suppose it's early this year, the back end of last year. But you know, he was really, you know, talking about how the early spring grazing puts the weight on the cattle, and it shortens their finishing period. Then come towards, you know, the end of this year, those cattle will have been out for a very long time, and that reduces the finishing period, which he estimates is sort of a break-even cost, a break-even exercise at most, you know. So.
Okay, very good. We'll move on. So,
yeah, so if we just take a look at the 10 steps, which Aiden sort of pointed out there on his farm. So number one, we won't dwell on too much because we're in the springtime now. There's not much we can do on it at this stage, but it's closing up the farm properly in the autumn time. Okay. So what this means, just for people maybe who are planning for this year, you know, you're starting closing up the farm from early October or the end of September. On heavier farms, you're closing the paddocks in rotation them, so you graze them, and then you close them up. And then from about the 20th of October onwards to early November, he's, you know, Aiden is closing those paddocks that he wants to get into first. So them ones that we're seeing in the video, those paddocks, they were closed within that period because he doesn't want very heavy covers on them, or else they'd be difficult to graze out. So they're, you know, they put like an ideal sort of cover on them for grazing at this time of year. They can get through a lot of area very quickly, which is all, you know, ties into spring rotation planner. You're closing up 60% of the farm by the 1st of November and 100% of the farm by through November. It could be finished on the 5th to 10th to 15th, it doesn't matter, or the end of November, but you're grazing at November time. And it might be slightly heavier on heavy farms that have to close up earlier. That 60% might be 80%, we'd say. And I suppose most of that grass that we looked at on Aiden's video, most of that grass available there was grown in October time. So we have to remember that. So closing up the farm properly, yeah.
And what about, I suppose we often see lads and they like to clean ground off completely there at the back end. I mean, how tight are you targeting as to graze in the autumn? You know, when they are closing these paddocks, are you cleaning them down to as far as you can go and hoping you have a nice?
Yeah, I suppose actually, and just from knowledge of Aiden's farm last year, he said that he was probably grazing them down too bare in the autumn time, so leaving cattle on them for slightly too long and going too far on them, and that was I suppose hitting the regrowth on those paddocks coming into winter time. So, but 4 centimeters is where you want to get down to. Where most people have the opposite problem, is they leave too much on it, and there's too much this white dead bush which carries over the winter time. There's very low quality in the sward, and you know the green shoots haven't been able to grow because there's not light getting down to the base. So we want to clean them out to 4 centimeters, Alan. That's what we're trying to get down to of a residual.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So the next thing then, we won't get into it too much now, but it's just using the spring rotation planner, okay? And this is just for a dry farm. I have a heavy farm example there showing in a second. But we just take, for instance, this farm here. We say it's 60 acres, so it's 24 hectares, 60 acres. We want to graze roughly a third of it by early by early March, right? And 2/3 of it then by just after Paddy's Day. So that's sort of our targets on this farm, right? Or if you like to take it, you know, just looking at it in terms of paddocks, you know, there's 15 paddocks, roughly 4 acres each. That's your 60 acres, right? So we're just trying to keep this very simple. So we graze a certain percentage of the farm every day, and in doing that, then we have our targets. By the 1st of March, we want a third of the farm grazed, or 2/3 by the Paddy's Day, and finishing up around the 7th of April, the end of the first week of April. Okay, so the cumulative area then to be grazed by that target date is 20 acres for the 1st of March. And the paddocks we're grazing in this period, they're medium cover paddocks. There might be paddocks that have been reseeded in the last couple of years, so they have good, you know, and better growth rates than older permanent pasture. They're drier paddocks, and they've good infrastructure for getting in and out quickly and easily. So they're the ones that are going to give you the best chance of grazing them, and they're going to give the best recovery. And for anyone filling this out, if they wanted to, they have the area to graze per week. Per week might be a better figure, because if you're in and out with stock, you might get out for 5 days one week, you might only get out for 4 days another week, you might be out every day another week. But at least by the end of the week, you sort of know where you should be. And then, if you can assign the paddocks then and break it up, so roughly, you have your 15 paddocks there, those are the first 5 on grazing, and then you're moving on, into the middle of your spring rotation plan, you're looking at targeting your silage ground. And, I suppose the key with this is, what we see in a lot of farms is, Alan, they don't get out till maybe, early, mid-March. They go straight to the silage ground because they want to get it grazed off before they cut a silage off it. And then, by the time they start grazing ground, it's towards the end of March, and then they have it all grazed in about 20, maybe 25 days. So come the 20th of April, they've actually only allowed themselves maybe a 30-day recovery on some of those paddocks, when, in this scenario here on this plan, we're actually allowing 60 days. So it's a much better plan to be sure that you have grass coming back. And that's why you have to graze so much by the 1st of March, is to have a lot of area coming back ready to be grazed again in April. And then again, the last stuff you're grazing in is the stuff grazed last in the autumn time, the slower growing paddocks and the wetter paddocks. Okay.
And being devil's advocate then, right, last year it was after Paddy's Day before we got any chance to graze really on most lands, because it was very wet. What strategy would you take in that situation where you're totally confined until maybe the 17th to the 30th of March, that you can't get anything out because the ground is so wet like last year? What's the plan then?
Yeah, well, so if I just move on to sort of a heavy farm, that might be a similar example there, because really the things with heavier farms or times like that when it's very wet, Alan, is you get out when you can. And I suppose the earlier you start, the better chance you have of getting out. And we're not saying, when I say the earlier you start, I don't mean like you start in, like in Aiden's case, like the end of January and you graze every day. No, you might start in early February, and you might get a day or two a week where you can get out for some part of the week. And then, cumulative, we're talking about cumulative area, getting through area, that does build up. Every little bit counts. And on heavier farms, it's really get out when you can, and you're usually finishing up maybe 2 weeks later, 1 to 2 weeks later on heavier ground, and that's because you're not getting as much grazed early on in the springtime, so you're not allowing it the chance to get back, and the growth rates are usually slower on heavier ground as well. So on ground, it's been heavy rainfall and wet. You get out when you can, but like if you're in the mindset, you see, it comes back to mindset a lot too. Because if you're not in the mindset, I'm not going to be letting them out till the 10th of March anyway. Well, then you've missed 40 days before that maybe there was a week somewhere along the way that you could have got out, but you're not really set up for it. You don't have the mindset to go out that way. You're not thinking along that line. So it's just been thinking about that. I should be out from early February, and how do I set myself up for that? And when the days are wet and things are bad, they're in the sheds. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not saying to be out every day, but just pick your days and get out. And you're finishing up a couple of weeks later to allow that growth to catch up then in April time. The growth rates are picking up into the 40s, 50s around that time. And you're allowing the grass to build back up then for a week or two in April.
Okay, just to finish on that slide, I suppose a question there, I suppose a lot of guys would ask is, letting cattle out and bringing them back in, does it upset their thrive? Is changing diet from silage to grass? What's your experience of that, John?
Yeah, well, I suppose if they're in and out, they're going to be getting a bit of silage and a bit of grass. So it actually sort of maybe helps to transition, that they're not going from a completely silage diet to a completely grass diet. Especially if it was sort of a wettish period, that they're going on from maybe dry silage onto wet grass, and there would be a bit of a setback maybe there, and especially if the weather was bad. But once they're in and out, they're getting adjusting their diet. They're actually adjusting, I suppose, they're acclimatizing to being back outside as well. Yeah. And Aiden will tell you, his cattle had a great thrive last year, and probably an extra month of grass, so it was an extra month's thriving and meant a lot less time in the shed being finished. So
and made a big difference to his profitability, we understand as well. It did.
Well, it comes back to that €2 per livestock unit per day, Alan. That's you don't see that, but if you did your profit monitor at the end of the year, you could put it down to that. That's where it's coming from.
Okay, move on.
Yeah, so flexibility is key. Yeah, grand. So early graze. So just to move on from some of the other steps that Aidan was talking about, getting cattle, I suppose, getting them to have an appetite for grazing is important. Um, and walking the paddocks and setting up the strip wire is a key one. So, point five there, planning your route to graze and success. So that's more about the grazing infrastructure and having a plan. Like, my shed is here, and this is where the farmyard is. I need to get to these. You've done your rotation plan. You've picked your 3 or 4 or 5 paddocks that you need to get to first. And maybe being off a roadway was a criteria for that. But how do you get cattle in and out, and just having a plan that way. If you don't have a plan, getting started again is, as Mark Twain said, getting started is the start of getting ahead. So you need to have a plan in place to get out. You're going with the lighter animals, so you're not obviously going with animals that are maybe over 500-600 kilos. They're animals 300-400 kilos that can get out. They're not going to do that much damage, or less likely to do any damage on paddocks, and they'll get through a lot of area quickly. They get adjusted really quickly to grass. And then your grazing covers that aren't heavy. So you can see from the picture there on the bottom right, that was Aiden's cattle out on 25th of January this year, and they're not in a heavy cover of grass. They're in a very light cover of grass, and they just nip it off and get through it very quickly, and that'll help Aiden reach his target.
Okay. And in terms you mentioned there, right, cattle having an appetite and setting up wires and that. Okay. How do farmers, I suppose, figure out, first of all, how big do they make a paddock, or how big do they throw the wire across? Where do they start with that? And then I suppose you mentioned there this appetite. I suppose, how do they ensure the cattle have an appetite, work the silage versus the grass into the diet?
Yeah, I suppose you start on day one, and you give them a certain area. So if it is 20 cattle or 30 cattle or whatever it is you're letting out, 50 cattle, it doesn't make a difference. You give them the area that you think they should have that grazed off in today, and then you go out tomorrow, because you should be moving them every day. If you want to be out in February time, it is a case of back fencing. If so you don't graze where you grazed today, you don't graze that area again till April time. So you do put up a wire and stop them running back over that. And if they've a lot left over, well, then you just reduce that area a little bit the next day. And if there's still a bit left over, reduce it again the next day, and you'll probably get it right by the third day. And if it's a case that they've you on the first day you let them out, and if after 3 or 4 hours the whole place gone bare, or they've a lot of it eaten, well, you need to give them a bit more. So I just readjusted over 2 or 3 days, Alan, and you get that right. And then in terms of getting their appetites right, if they're in the shed, you sort of know what they're eating in terms of silage. So if you're roughly saying that you want them to eat half grass and half silage, well then give them sort of the half bale of silage like Aiden was doing, and let them finish that during to get fed that in the evening time. Let them eat that during the night. By the morning time, then they're starting building up a little bit of hunger, and then you're ready to let them out to grass again, and then they get their other 50% from grazing. So it's about just adjusting it. And if they're too full and they look too full in the morning time, you're better off pulling back a bit of silage and leaving them there for 3 or 4 hours, because let them build that hunger and put them out for a shorter period if that be the case.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Good job.
All right. Yeah, and so the last few points then. So be flexible in your approach. So the cattle can go in and out. That's the big thing. You can see there from the couple of pictures of Aiden's shed where they come out, and the roadway down to the paddocks. Most farms would have some sort of a roadway for machinery and bringing slurry in and out. So that mightn't be a problem, but getting to a lot of different paddocks might be more of an issue. So it's just about setting yourself up with even sort of grass roadways like they've done on some of the research farms, and some farmers will do it where they'll have just a grass roadway where light yearlings can run up and down in and out a couple of different times up and down it. Yes, it does get browned up a little bit, but generally it greens up again by April, May. You wouldn't even notice that they had been on it.
And in terms of that, then I suppose we're just to cut across you there. Like that's the big question we always get in terms of poaching, right? Some people avoid poaching like the plague, and some people say a little is okay, and some people might push the boat a bit farther. Is there a kind of a cut-off point where we say in Teagasc that, right, this is too much or this is too little? Where's the happy medium, I suppose, between getting early grass in the diet? Because I suppose we are dealing with a lot of heavier ground in the country predominantly, and at the minute, look, ground is very wet after the last 2-3 weeks rain. It's drying a little bit at the minute, but probably there's rain forecast again. So where's the happy medium in all this?
Yeah, so the happy medium is, I suppose, the main thing is to be getting out walking regularly. Like if cattle aren't out and you're thinking of putting them out, you should be walking out to the paddocks that you divide up for getting out early. You should be walking into them, probably twice a week anyway, just to see what they're like, and so you have a feeling for what ground conditions are like. And once you feel ground conditions are okay, that's the prime opportunity to get them out. And it's a bit of a leap of faith, because you might say, geez, I'm not sure if it is or not, but do it on day one. They're only over a small area. More than likely, most farmers are under cautious, so they're not going to do that much. And after a week or so, you get a good feel as to what ground conditions, what it can take it. Now, if it's too wet, they stay inside. Like in Aiden's video there, the cattle just get the silage if it's too wet. But like his thing is, they'll try again tomorrow. That just because they're inside for one day and it was wet for one day, doesn't mean now they're in. They're in for a week. It doesn't mean that. It means that they're in and they will try again tomorrow, and we get back out. And I suppose as long as the cattle are allowed marked ground, and it won't affect the growth rates afterward. But if they're poaching it, that's when it's really going to be really affecting it. So as long as they're not leaving big deep imprints in the ground, Alan, that's okay. Like I have a picture. Maybe I'll bring it up after the presentation, just where it shows a marker or a pen in the ground of what Aiden's, what they were doing. There was only imprints of maybe an inch and top of the surface, like so. That wasn't damage. That was just marking, is what I call it.
Okay, we'll move on.
Yeah, so just answer the fertilizer there now, Alan. So that's the last point. So I suppose when you graze this, graze a lot of area and early on in the springtime, you need to have grass coming back for April time. So spring nitrogen is essential to boost the grass growth in the springtime. So, and we want to do this in a way that's going to give an economic return and also an environmental return. Like it's not going to do any damage to the environment. So we don't want to waste any of it, basically, which is a win-win for the farmer and the environment. So, for people who are getting out early and especially on drier ground, you should be looking at probably putting slurry on about, I would say, a quarter or a third of the farm early in the springtime. And we can use the low emission slurry spreading as well. That we're going to get more bang for our buck in terms of nitrogen in the slurry. We're not going to be letting it volatilize up into the atmosphere. And then we're looking at putting about 23 units of nitrogen an acre of protected urea on, we'd say, the 60 to 75% of the remainder of the farm. So that 2,500 gallons of slurry through LESS will give the equivalent of nitrogen of that about half bag urea. So that's what's going out early, and then that's been topped up again in March, about 5-6 weeks later. Again, if there's slurry available, slurry to some of the paddocks that have been grazed in the last month, and then topping up again with fertilizer. And you're probably try to bring it up to a case where if you're on heavy ground and not grazing out not getting out that early to graze, somewhere around 40-50 units per acre applied. And if you're out early and grazing a lot of ground and want grass going back, you're probably up on 60 units then on some of the drier ground. And this doesn't have to be split up by farm either. And this can be by paddock. When I say 46 to 60, you might have 5 paddocks and they're only going to get 40 units of nitrogen by early April, and you could have the other 10 paddocks or whatever you have, and they might get 60 units.
So you'll pick a farm within a farm nearly to make your decisions on how heavy and how intensive you want to go.
Yeah, it's not a case of all or nothing anymore. It's a case of paddock by paddock and knowing where you're going to get the best response. And we might come to that in a minute. But just to I suppose quantify it, your half a bag of nitrogen or your protected urea per acre is about 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. That's just formula from acres to hectares. It's about 30 kilos of nitrogen, and it gives an average response of 10. Right, that's an average response from different studies that were done. So that's 300 kilos of dry matter per hectare. So if you go back to what is that, our bale of silage is about 200 kilos of dry matter. We're getting about a bale and a half of silage, a bale and a half of grass, if you like, for every half bag of urea put out. Right. So if we're stocked at around 2 livestock units per hectare, that's about 150 kilos of grass, 3/4 of a bale, if you like, for each livestock unit, which is about 12 days worth of feeding. Okay, so that's 12 days of feeding, and we said at the very start, every day grass is worth €2. So if we can get out for 12 days and it's worth €2 to us, that's €24 per animal. We multiply that by 2 animals per hectare, we're €48 per hectare. So that's what the gain of it is. That's what we're getting from it. And the cost of it then, we just put urea at 340 a ton. It's in or around that. That's about 75 cents a kilo. And again, we're spreading 30 kilos of it, which is about €24. So for the €24 we're buying into the farm, we're getting about €48 back. So it's a return on investment of 2 to 1.
Okay. So if we're to take though this situation, right, what we're looking at here is probably a guy, if all your farm was like that, you're probably, someone who's a lot of reseeding done, you'd say good side fertility and a reasonable stocking rate. But if we take
someone who's looking after the grazing ground and
I suppose in terms of would this advice apply? Okay, if we take a lot of more typical situation in certain parts of the country, we're dealing with a little over 1 livestock unit a hectare, no reseeding done, very little ryegrass in the sward, and moderate to poor soil fertility. When would you be saying to start going with fertilizer in that situation, where you get an environmental and an economic response? I suppose when would be time you?
Well, I suppose if you're very lightly stocked, you can probably get, and as long as you've closed up the farm properly, you should have a level of grass there that would allow you to graze, I suppose, with less fertilizer. We're talking about farms maybe stocked around 2, or maybe in around 2 anyway. So if you're only stocked at half that, well, then the response is going to be low. Well, your economic response is going to be lower, because do you have the animals there to even graze that extra grass? Like, do you have too much grass as it is anyway? And I suppose the question has to be asked in Alan, well, am I getting out early enough to graze? And if it's a case that maybe soil type doesn't allow, or climate conditions isn't allowing that, well, then the early run mightn't be for your farm.
Okay.
It might be a case of sometime from mid-February to early March, in around that period, when you get a dry week or a dry few days and ground conditions allow it, you'll go with fertilizer then, or go with slurry then, and you might put on you might go with the same application slurry, but you might increase the fertilizer application. If it was early March, for example, you might put on 35, 40 units, and that would do you till April time.
Yeah. Okay.
And that might be a better way of doing it. But I suppose this, as you said, you're right to point out, this plan is for people who want to get out grazing early, and I suppose have the ground there that they can get fertilizer out on.
Okay. Very good.
Okay. So so this is I suppose we're looking at the response to early spring nitrogen, and like I suppose that 10 kilos that you mentioned, I know you say, Alan, that that might be for farms that have a good level, maybe soil fertility, a percentage of reseeding done every year, and looking after the place, and that will give you a best response. But I suppose there's also other things that we can do, I suppose, to put that response in our favor. Like, for that farm that you mentioned, maybe there's a quarter of the farm that has been reseeded in the last few years, and it is a bit drier, and I usually try and graze it first. And maybe they're the fields that maybe there's a quarter of the farm that I will put a bit of fertilizer out on early, because I get a response to it. So you don't have to put it on the places that aren't going to give you the response. That's what I'd say. So I break it down by paddock by paddock basis, and like you can swing that response in your favor. So obviously the soil temperatures we can't really control if we just go through it here. The rain we can't really control. Growth rates we control to a certain extent by obviously the grass varieties and soil fertility. Ground type we can't really control. Perennial ryegrass, yes we can. So these are the ones who are giving us the best response. So if we mostly perennial ryegrass in the sward, we have a good level of grass height. You can see there, if you 2 or 3 fists of grass, which is maybe 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare, or 7 or 8 centimeters or above it, that will give you a good response, because grass grows grass, and generally those heavier covers are slightly higher in soil temperature because they insulate the ground a little bit. And also you have optimum soil fertility, that's going to give you a good response. And you've infrastructure there that you can get cattle in to graze and off again very quickly without doing any damage. That's going to lead you to having ideal conditions for regrowing and regrowth. So they're the ones going to give you the best response. So that's where I'd be putting my fertilizer.
Okay, and a very useful table that is there for anyone who I suppose needs something to assist in their decision making. You know, and it really sums it up there. So that's very good, John.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's up on I think it's up on the website, or we can make the link available anyway.
And I suppose just to remind everyone there that's watching, you can send in your questions there to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen there. Just type them in, and we'll answer them when we're finished the presentation there in a minute.
Grand. So I might just summarise now, Alan. I suppose just to summarise then, have a grazing plan in place. Identify that first third of the farm, which paddocks you want to graze first. Okay, so don't be worrying about the whole farm. Identify that first 3 or 4 paddocks that you want to get out to. How are you going to get out to them? What stock are going to get out? And if you start, the earlier you start, the better chance you have of getting through area and having that grass coming back. Like, people are amazed that they think something that might be grazing early February, they can't believe how much grass is on it come the end of the first week of April, because it really kicks on after Paddy's Day. Those paddocks, they just start growing well. So, and also then identifying your wet day paddocks. So obviously on the drier days, you try and graze maybe ground that might be slightly more prone to being a bit wetter, and then on the wetter days, you try and graze the paddocks that are slightly drier, that you're still being able to get grazing for as many days as possible. So, and it might be even a case that you could have a 4-acre paddock and the top 2 acres are dry and the bottom 2 are wet. Split that paddock with a strip wire there for the springtime, and don't worry about the wet part of it till after Paddy's Day. But try and get off as much as you can, and back fencing as well. And just have a plan for where your slurry and fertilizer is going. So put the slurry onto lower covers and get the fertilizer out to the heavier covers and the drier paddocks and things like that. You're going to get grazing first.
Okay.
So
I suppose we've heard a lot there, John. Thanks very much for your presentation. You can keep sending in those questions there. I suppose we've touched on a lot of things from getting I suppose out early. We've touched on the amount of fertilizer. I suppose we're in maybe I suppose a renewed and increased focus now on the environment and sustainability and ensuring that what fertilizer and slurry we do put out, we're getting good bang for our bucks. So we'll thank you there, John. We'll close down their presentation now, and we'll move into the Q&A session. So thanks very much for that.
No worries, Alan. I'd just like to thank the sponsors of the Grass10 as well. So without them, we wouldn't be able to do our work. So we have Teagasc, the Department, Farmers Journal, AIB, Grassland Agro, and FBD.
Hello, John. Just having a bit of trouble there. Turn on my video. Second now. Sorry, a bit of a glitch there. Okay, you can hear me there, John?
Yeah, I can hear you, Grant. Can you hear me, Alan? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. I suppose plenty of questions in again here. I'm just going to read down through a few of them here, and we can tease them out. There's some very meaty ones. There's a lot of people here with a lot of deep thinkers on tonight. So I suppose the first one is a bit of a topical one. I suppose we're not seeing a huge amount of grass measuring on dry stock farms so far. Maybe there's a little bit more happening maybe on maybe the dairy side. Why is that, do you think? And is there ways we could maybe improve that or get greater uptake, do you think?
Yeah, I suppose maybe one of the factors might be the factor you mentioned, Alan, that maybe some of the dry stock ground maybe are on poorer soil types in different parts of the country. And it doesn't matter what part of the country is at all, but that might be one factor. I suppose there's more work off farm on dry stock farms, beef farms, and generally the infrastructure on dairy farms has probably been slightly better than dry stock farms, so that there's a bit of catching up to do as well. So, but I do see the farmers that I'm working with through the Grass10 program and the grazing courses. They're in the second year, a lot of them are up and measuring, and there's even more starting to measure now this year because they see the benefit from it of the farms that are doing it.
Yes.
And they're there on farms like Aiden's farm, like we did the video on, and other farms as well. So it is growing. It is growing from a small base. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, technical one here then. Just say we're talking about covers, ranging from 300 kilos dry matter to 1600. So almost bare fields versus, a nice cover of grass of around 10 centimeters. Like, how would farmers at both ends of the scale manage grass this spring to get the best return those guys that have managed it well in the autumn versus those that graze well into the almost winter time.
Yeah. So I suppose maybe I didn't make it clear there just on that, but I suppose when I was saying the average farm cover in the country was around in the 800s, that was the average, but it just meant that there was a range of covers on farm of 300 to 1600. But either way, there definitely is a level of different covers on the farm. Like, there's some farms that will get sheep into graze for a month in December and the whole place is bare. There's that sort of a level of grass on farms, and then there's farms that maybe didn't get out or got wet at the back end and had to house maybe earlier than usual, so they have a lot of grass maybe on farm. But I suppose the spring rotation planner sort of works for most farms in that regard. No matter if you've less grass or more grass, you're still trying to get through a certain amount of area. And what it means obviously is, if I've less grass and I still have to get through a certain amount of area, I just put out less stock to do it. And if I have more grass and have to get through a certain amount of area, I'll have to put out a few more stock to get through it. And it's just managing stock then, Alan, really. Yeah.
Okay. An interesting one then, right? We talked a bit about on-off grazing, and I suppose Aiden McGuire there we saw in the Green Acres participant. He's put the stock in and out. Has there been any work done, the question is by Teagasc, on the impact this has on daily gains, changing, I suppose, grass by day, silage by night versus a properly balanced diet indoors?
I'm not familiar with it, Alan. Maybe you might be more so with indoors, but I suppose I'm Grass10 and focused on outside, so I'm not too sure. But look, as I said in the video there, Aiden has a long grazing season. He has a short finishing period, and it's from he says indoors is more or less a break even exercise, just to put the fat cover on them and things like that.
Production, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's at the grasses when he's putting on the weight and making the money. So.
Okay. And I suppose, right, Aiden is able to get, I suppose, a longer grazing season now. Is he making less silage as a result, or is he still making the same amount as kind of a big buffer? Is his cost cutting with the silage, or is he still holding the amount he's making?
Yeah, I suppose, Aiden has gone, and there's a couple of farmers gone this way that I'm working with as well. They're gone to the stage now where because they're managing maybe the grass better in the summertime, they're taking out more paddocks, and they're not actually cutting as big as areas for silage cut. They still have a reserve left over from the winter time, so that's a backup. But they're not cutting as big as areas, so they're cutting smaller areas and cutting lighter cuts, so they're getting much better quality. And then obviously, if you can get, say, for instance, a month longer at grass, you don't need that silage anyway. So you can, that's one thing Aiden said. Like, he doesn't need to get a bulk anymore. He can focus on quality because his winter is shorter. So, but it's when you're changing over from maybe cutting 30-40% of the farm for silage to a system, maybe you're only cutting maybe 20% and taking out paddocks. There is a bit of teething in that, Alan, and you sort of have to tease it out. So,
next question there is a bit topical maybe as well. I suppose roadways. Someone asked, right, would you think it's justified, I suppose, putting in roadways on dry stock farms to stretch the grazing season, given they're expensive, I suppose, and maybe you're not getting the same use out of them? Would maybe just a strip wire along by a ditch do maybe to run them up and down, or what do you think?
Exactly. Yeah, no. Well, some people might be thinking of doing something along the lines of putting in a roadway anyway for machinery, maybe getting machines in during the summertime, like silage machines, or else getting slurry out in the shoulders of the year or whatever. So they might be thinking of doing it anyway. So and some of them might be there already. I suppose if it was just for livestock only and you knew it was only for cattle, there's nothing wrong with putting in what I suppose Paddy O'Brien, he's farming on heavy soils. I mean, he's a dairy farmer, but that doesn't make a difference in terms of grazing grass. He's putting in, we'd say, a metre or metre and a half wide roadways, and it's costing, I think, around €8-10 a metre. So I think that will more than pay for itself in 2 or 3 years easily by getting out for, we'd say, 2 or 3 weeks longer each year. It would pay for itself. So doing with say a couple of 100 meters is going to cost you around 2,000. So you can see there on Aiden's farm, if he can get his 100 cattle out, whatever, it's €100 a day, 20 days, and that's the roadway paid for. And that roadway might last him 10 years. So
Okay. And I kind of one there, the intricacies, I suppose, of managing early turnout. I suppose it's kind of a double question. It's on managing the spring rotation planner on fragmented farms where there's no option maybe to on-off graze. And the second thing is, I suppose we often get this question. We talk about early turnout, but given the nature of fragmentation on dry stock farms, generally the sheds are in one block and there might be 4 or 5 other blocks.
Yeah.
People are generally afraid to put stock out on these out blocks in case they have to bring them back in. What would be your advice there?
Yeah, but just make the best of what you have in that, Alan. You just focus on that home block. If it is 3 or 4 blocks, perhaps maybe the home block has 30 acres and there's maybe just say for instance 3 other blocks with 10 acres or 15 acres in them, whatever it is. Do work that spring rotation plan on the 30 acres. Get that through, and once you're halfway through, grazing that home area, it's probably it could be up on Paddy's Day or just around that time. And by that stage, then you're probably thinking of letting other cattle down to the other blocks. So, but it's just making do a good job on what you can do first, and work from there really. And it obviously depends. I know some fellas have out blocks and they're dry. The out blocks are actually drier than the home block, and maybe they have maybe there's some sheltered paddocks down there that they don't mind letting one group of cattle down. And if there's a bad night, there's plenty of shelter or whatever. So,
okay.
It might be a case of bringing a bale down outside, but look, it's a work in progress. Yeah.
I'm here in Limerick tonight, and we've got an inch of snow still on the ground. It's getting a bit melting a small bit, but there's 2 questions in on fertilizer. One is on protected. Well, they're both on protected urea here. I suppose the benefit of using protected urea in early spring versus normal urea, is there an advantage? I suppose there's 2 questions of that. One is the economic and one is the environmental side. And the other question is protected urea more dangerous to use? I suppose we have had people question us about this for the last while, but I think that's been proven not true.
Yeah. No, there's nothing dangerous about using it. If it's dangerous from a leaching point of view or more dangerous to the environment, I suppose the opposite is actually true. It's better for the environment in terms of more of it's going to be utilised. If there's less greenhouse gas emissions off it, there's less of a good leach, I suppose, as well. So that they are the benefits, I suppose, of using it over the standard urea as well. Okay. Albeit, I suppose that the advantage is probably more minimal in the springtime, but definitely throughout the year it has more benefit. And we get credit, I suppose, on a national level as well, Alan, for using more protected urea, which allows us to farm the way we're farming and things like that as well. So it is good for everyone if more of us can start using it. Yeah.
The question,
it's no harm trying it on some of the farm this year if you haven't tried it before, and like everything, work your way into it,
Okay. Question on zero grazing cattle instead of moving them in and out. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, sure. Look, the cost of zero grazing is about the cost of silage. So if you're after the money and you're after your €2 per day per livestock unit, you're not going to get much of it if you're have to start a tractor and put on a machine and bring it in and that sort of thing. If it's an outblock, maybe fair enough. You might do it. If you're tight on silage and things like that. But ultimately, you'd be better off if you were going to spend your money on a zero grazer or spend it on doing up a bit of a roadway to get out to those paddocks. You'd be better off putting it into the roadway, I think.
And I imagine maybe the contractor cost maybe kind of cancels out the value of the grass, maybe, or maybe you might have figures on that as well.
Yeah, well, I think roughly it comes back the same cost to silage, Alan, when you work it out. I think from lads who are using it in the shoulders regularly, that's what they tell you. It's actually not much cheaper than silage, and sometimes they feel that they should actually bale it up, for instead of zero grazing in the autumn time and things like that. But because it's handier and you don't have to use it all at one time. But look, it's generally I just write it off as silage, to be honest with you, Alan.
Okay, and he says he calves there from a member each year. He wants to know, could he consider that he grazes his ground in the over the winter? Could he consider that to be part of his grazed ground in his spring rotation planner?
Yeah, I seen that question there, and yeah, I don't know problem with that if he's getting grazing it through the November, December, January, February time. Look, I suppose you want to have your instead of letting the same few calves out to the same paddock every day, if you could have it lined up that they easily have access, or split the paddock. If it's a big paddock, split it into 3 or 4 bits or something like that. But that you're sort of grazing a bit, but moving stock off it then and allowing it to grow back. That's important too. Like we can't go out you can't go out and graze everywhere and then run out of grass and say, oh, this spring rotation planner doesn't work. You have to graze a bit and move on, sort of way, and get through area. That's what it's about, and allow that grass to grow back. So yeah, I'd include that if that's what's happening. Yeah.
Okay. A question on spreading fertilizer then, right? Current soil temperatures touching around the 5 degrees in general. Now it's dropped today, obviously, with the snow that's been falling around the country and that. But is there any point even thinking about spreading urea? And I suppose they mean probably over the next couple of weeks as well, you know?
Yeah. Well, sure, look, it's. I think the daylight is lengthening. We are starting getting, like, yesterday evening there was nearly bright till 6 o'clock, and so it was. The evenings are getting longer, so things are in our favour. Albeit it's been very cold this week, and it's going to looking like a lot of heavy rain in most parts of the country for the weekend. So I wouldn't be going anywhere at least until next week, and I don't know, actually. I can't say after that. But what you do want is, once soil temperatures get up over 5 degrees, we can put it out. And as long as we get soil temperatures at 5 to 6 degrees at least for 2 days anyway after we apply it, and no big washout of rain, I'd be happy enough that most of that is taken up.
Another question there. How safe is it, or how soon after maybe can you graze a paddock after spreading slurry using low emission systems?
So I think I suppose, look, there's a couple of variables there. If the slurry is very watery and you put it out and it's put it out light, and you get a shower of rain and it washes it in a bit, there's no problem probably within 10 days or 2 weeks to get back onto it. But if it's thicker stuff and it's went out heavier and you don't get enough much rain to wash it in, you could be looking at a month. But generally, you probably get away with putting it out up until, I suppose, probably up until around Paddy's Day or after that on grazing ground. Because if you think about it, you're probably if you're grazing a paddock around the 20th or 25th of March, you probably want to be back in there in 20 or 25 days, 30 days time. So you're looking at if you don't get, I suppose, a spell of rain there to wash that in, you could be at risk of not being able to graze it. So roughly, probably before the end of March, really, you want to have it out with the
okay.
out.
Farmer there to me just wrote in. He says, "I spread urea on Monday. Will it work, or is it gone?" What do you think?
Love them questions, Alan.
Very simple.
Yeah. Spread on Monday. Again, it comes back to soil temperatures. If the soil temperatures drop below that, sort of down below 5 degrees, if they were at that, it wouldn't be gone anywhere, but it just wouldn't be taken up. So it depends, I suppose, how much rain is coming this weekend. If there was a lot of rain coming this weekend, I'd be unsure as to how much would actually be left there. But if you're not getting much rain this weekend, you might be okay. So the only way to tell that is that there's probably a field that you didn't do, and there's probably that field, and just look at them in 3 or 4 weeks' time and tell the difference.
Okay. We'll just finish up there. 1 or 2 last questions then quickly. Any options there on tips on how to graze very heavy or peaty type soils? Is there anything different you're doing?
Just all those things we talked about tonight, Alan, they're just even more important than heavy or peaty soils. So you're I suppose, if you haven't been out grazing much early, or even if you're, say, typically getting out mid-March and you want to try and get out in early March, no matter what it is, I suppose you're always trying to compare yourself to not to your neighbour who might have a dry farm or some other part of the country. Compare yourself to what you did last year and try and improve on that. So, because at the end of the day, the benefit is going to be for you. So I'd be looking at probably picking your paddocks. So, pick the paddocks that you're going to get to graze. So pick 2 or 3 paddocks that they might be the drier of the peaty ones even. They might be drier, or they might be near the shed, or they might have better access. Pick those paddocks. Pick the group of stock to go out on them. So your lighter stock, just pick one group, go out and set up the wire, and then pick your day. Like, there's been serious drying out over the last 3 or 4 days, even in places that got heavy rain. There's been serious drying out. There's cattle and cows out grazing up in Cavan. So, there's nothing really stopping you now at the moment. So.
And one last thing, we'll just finish up on this, just as we're running out of time here, but it's more a comment, but it's probably a proper comment. It says, all these paddocks we talk about, they need a lot of water drinkers. And I suppose that's the biggest problem, John, I suppose you see when you go on farms, is there isn't enough water drinkers. And it's correct, we do need a lot of water drinkers in these farms.
Yeah. But if we place them in the right place, we'll do a lot, Alan, because a lot of people have a tendency to stick them in the corner. So when you stick them in the corner, they generally only do one corner of the paddock or one half of the paddock. So, but like, and they don't want to put them out in the middle of the field because they might cut silage off it, sort of way. So we have to just get our head around, stick it in the middle, and then I can split the paddock. If you have two paddocks beside each other and put it in the middle of the two, you could really make up 8 paddocks if you wanted to there with one water truck, So it's been strategic that way with it. But like if you like in Aiden's situation there, he's getting them out maybe some days only for 3 or 4 hours. So they've water in the shed, they go outside, eat the grass, and then they can come back in. So it's not the end of the world if they don't get it for 3 or 4 hours. But if you're out for longer than that, you probably would want water in the field.
Okay. Look, thanks very much, John, for that. We'll finish up there. We've done about an hour there. I'll thank yourself and all the Grass10 team for all the work you're doing on your program. I'd also like to thank Aiden McGuire, our Green Acres farmer, for contributing to the video, and his 2 advisors, James Fitzgerald and David Argue, for their work. And our next webinar will be the 18th of March. It's going to be with Paul Crossan, the head of Centre in Grange, and it's going to be a focus on, I suppose, current research that's been done in Teagasc Grange to meet future challenges. So it should be very topical and very interesting, and maybe give a bit of an insight as to what's going to be happening in the future on Irish beef farms. So thanks to everyone involved, and good night.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Thanks to Aiden. Thank you very much. So
bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.